Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have what is sometimes a controversial guest joining us today. Mike Rivero, the host of WhatReallyHappened.com, is with us. Our guests either love him or love to dispute some of his claims. Either way, he's a favorite among those who watch Reluctant Preppers. Mike, thanks for joining us here again.
Thank you for having me again.
There's no shortage of fake news, or what certainly could be fake news around us. It's so difficult for an ordinary person to separate the chaff from the wheat in this swirl of stuff that's coming at us constantly. And although it seems really that those who disputed things that were claimed by the mainstream media or by the government sources in the past were seen as eccentric, and now that's just kind of commonplace to assume that there's an angle, there's a spin, there's a perhaps a party agenda or some other agenda in almost every message that we're confronted with. How long ago did you come to this realization that this was going to be a major focus for you in life?
Well, to be very honest, all the way back in 1994, when I first stumbled on the Vince Foster affair, I figured I was going to get involved, make the information I had available to my friends in the news media, and that would be it. And I didn't realize it was basically going to be the end of my previous life and the start of this whole other chapter of my life, which has now gone on for a quarter of a century. As far as the fake news, basically what's going on is we're being jammed. And there is so much fake news being put on out there to make it harder for those of us in the independent media to sift through and find what's really going on there. In fact, somebody sent me this website. It was conservativesomething.com. And it had two headline stories, one that Tom Selleck had passed away, and the other was that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away. Neither was true. And I think the goal was the hope that I would link to those stories and damage the image of my own website. So there's a lot of dirty trick playing going on, and it does make it very, very difficult. But in this age where we're just being lied to on such a massive scale, I mean, the propaganda coming out of the corporate media is very, very intense. People who really want to know what's going on, they're going to have to work at it. And they're going to have to think, they're going to have to trust their own analytical abilities.
You mentioned the work that we have to take on, the burden that we have to shoulder as free-thinking individuals. There's a related question from one of our viewers from Thought Challenger. He asks, if Donald Trump doesn't get rid of the deep state, would it be time for the people to take the country back?
Well, I do not like to advocate for any kind of violence in the streets or violent revolution. I would like to see the equivalent of the Yellow Vest protest take off in this country, and they already have. They're not being covered by the corporate media because the corporate media doesn't want us serfs getting bad ideas. I'm looking at what's going on with the United States, and it has been my conclusion for some time that the central government and the central bank are heading towards a Soviet Union-style collapse. And so the advice I generally tend to give out to people, as frustrating and angering as it is to watch events unfold, especially with yet another war looming in Venezuela, I think just waiting it on out and being prepared to restart the country. And the model I like to use is the Russian republics, which arose from the ashes of the Soviet Union and put together a decent country with a good working economy.
Another question we have from Silver Slave 333, which talks about a topic you just mentioned, is when will the masses stop supporting the criminal central bank's Ponzi currencies and choose real money, silver and gold, to save and trade in?
Well, I would like to see that happen, and it would be sort of a civilian version of what we're already seeing around the world, where other nations are starting to drop use of the U.S. dollar. And unfortunately, the Federal Reserve has been around for about 100 years. All of us grew up hearing in school that this is the way it was supposed to work, that those paper notes represented real money, which we know they don't. Originally, those paper notes were just claim checks for the real money. And more people are starting to resort to barter and to actually use silver and gold coins at their melt value for currency. I'd like to see it become more widespread, but I think as we start seeing the effects of inflation in our economy more and more, people are going to be looking for alternatives.
Since you mentioned different nations' central banks accumulating gold, Pedro Magoo asks, for your Canadian following, so you've got a Canadian following, please ask the opinion. Please ask Mike's opinion of the impact of Canada's zero gold reserves and what that will have on typical Canadians.
Well, that basically means that Canada does not really have any hard commodity support for their currency, which means that as the economy starts to get more and more unstable, the volatility will be worse for the Canadian currency than for those nations who are backing their currency at least partly in gold. I think it was a very foolish idea to get rid of Canada's gold reserves. I remember years ago when Great Britain sold off much of their gold reserves, and they basically sold it off at a loss. They didn't even try and get decent price for it. It was almost this attitude of get rid of the gold, get rid of the gold. We don't want a world where gold is seen as valuable. And then following the 2008 financial crisis, all of a sudden the central banks had a change of heart and they started buying gold just as fast as they could. Russia's buying gold, China's buying gold. It's greatly in demand, and yet for some strange reason the price is still down. And I suspect that like so much else of our economy, it is being manipulated.
Another viewer asks, is there a cure for liberalism?
I don't know, shock therapy maybe. The problem is that liberalism has stopped being a political ideology and it's become a cult. And people want to believe they're in love with that idea that by being a liberal, they're automatically better than everybody else around them. That they and they alone hold the secret for a better world. And no amount of argument can convince them that they're wrong about their positions because they won't argue. They just scream insults. And you look at some of the stuff that has come out of liberalism, like Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal, which even Democrats are saying, this cannot be made to work. And yet people are already out there saying, yes, this is how we're going to save the world here. And but again, liberalism is what's strangling our nation and, for that matter, Europe.
Another viewer, Josh Hickman, compares your mission with that of Alex Jones. How do you see similarity or difference between your approach and Alex Jones's?
Well, we're definitely different. I mean, I used to do Alex Jones' show a lot, and we used to be friends. We kind of parted ways over the subject of Israel. Alex tends to be a little bit more sensational, and I tend to keep my reports down to earth and as factual as possible. And so we're different in that way.
If we could move on to a new topic, one that you and I were discussing before we started, and I'd like to entitle this one Fire or Ice. And it's something that has been daunting, just as with many other controversial topics. We keep and have been hearing for most of 2 decades now about global warming or global climate change, or you keep getting rebranded every time the science gets questioned. But that's one trend that people have been talking about for some time, and they point to saying, gee, things were different when I was a kid, and now the typical weather patterns around different parts of the U.S. Seem to be somewhat different, that kind of thing, or other evidence that's pointed to elsewhere around the world. But we also hear about the grand solar minimum and how everybody better prepare for a loss of being able to raise crops in northern elevations and all kinds of things like that. So we've certainly had some evidence of that recently with some Arctic blasts coming down from the north into the U.S. So can you talk to us about what do we know about whether we're going to end in fire or ice?
Well, the most important thing you need to understand going in is that climate is always changing. It always has, it always will. There has never been a time in the geological history of the planet where climate stayed the same. And what Al Gore and his buddies did, pardon me, is they took something that was happening naturally and they declared it a crisis and an emergency and offered to sell us all a solution. And this was all happening back in the 1990s, and back then the Earth actually was warming. So they got on global warming, and they fed us all these stories about, polar bears going extinct, and the ice caps melting, and the coastline flooding, and it just kept up the fear mongering, trying to get people to come on board and buy carbon credits and pay carbon taxes. Then, starting in the early 2000s, Mother Nature pulled a fast one, and the Earth started cooling. Because we are going into this grand solar minimum. And for those who don't understand what that is, the sun has cycles of activity. It is not a constant. And there is the 11-year sunspot cycle. There's the 22-year magnetic cycle. And scientists have now determined that there are 3 other cycles, one at 60 years, one at just over 100 years, and one that they suspect is longer than that. And they all go high and they all go low. But right now, they're all going low all at the same time, and it's being described as a new Maunder minimum. Now, the Maunder minimum was named for the astronomer Maunder, who first noticed that the sun seemed to have no sunspots at all, coinciding with the start of the Little Ice Age. And so...
Hey, Mike, we got to get reconnected here with a new video connection. So can you pick up where you left off about a mini ice age that happened in the past?
Yeah, there was a mini ice age that happened, and basically happened in this 1700s, actually earlier than that. And it coincided with the observation by an astronomer named Maunder that there were no sunspots on the sun, no visible sunspots at all. And it came to be known as the Maunder minimum. And it's since been understood that the amount of sunspots on the sun is an indicator of how much activity it's going through, and that directly affects the Earth climate. Well, the sun, once again, is featureless. There are no sunspots, and so it looks like we're going into a new Maunder minimum, which is why the Earth is clearly, demonstrably getting cooler over these last, 15 years. Every year it's a colder winter, new records get set, and still the corporate media is out there trying to claim that this is all the fault of human-caused global warming, and that you're just going to have to pay carbon taxes and so forth and so on. It's all your fault, in other words. And what was really funny is yesterday there was we have a lot of candidates stepping into the Democratic race for 2020,
yeah.
And one of them came on in. She's campaigning on global warming, and unfortunately for her, her little outdoor platform was in the middle of a blizzard that was so bad it was approaching whiteout conditions. So a little bit of irony and poetic justice there. But the corporate media is still out there trying to find some way they can convince Americans that all of this snow and ice is the result of Earth getting warmer, and the Earth is getting warmer solely because of human activity, which is, complete and utter nonsense. Humans' effects on the environment are microscopic compared to things like the sun and so forth.
There's a couple of aspects about that are of, I think, strong interest to people who are preparedness-minded. One is, well, what in fact should we be preparing for? Should we be building greenhouses so that we can make sure that we can still garden even after it gets cold? Or should we be, moving south, that kind of thing? People want to know how to prepare for what's really coming, and they don't really want this static and flack and narrative. They want to know what's really going on. The second one is something you alluded to in the beginning, and that's this ulterior motive about never letting a good crisis go to waste and converting almost any phenomenon, especially if people perceive it to be vital to their life and their future, into something that's going to take away liberties and rights from the individual and cement those in with the state. So, could you address that phenomenon with us about examples that we definitely see in the last decade or more that we're never letting a good crisis go to waste, even if that crisis has to be manufactured. But the point of taking away personal liberties and accumulating liberties at the state level.
All right, well, let's go back to the first question about preparing for a new mini ice age. And first of all, you need to understand that with the exception of the extreme Arctic and Antarctic latitudes, the human race came through it more or less intact. These were the days of what was called the London Ice Fair, where every winter the Thames River would actually freeze over solid. And they would put little booths out there and have food and games and music and a lot of skating and winter games. So it's not like the end of the world. It's not like day after tomorrow. But a greenhouse is always good, and it is possible to farm in a greenhouse right through the winter, because I did it when I was a kid living in New Hampshire. Obviously, if you are really, really far north, you need to evaluate what's going on with the winters you're experiencing right now before you make the decision to try and relocate. If you do decide to stay, you might want to think about, improving the insulation in your home, just common sense things like that. Double pane windows to really lock the heat in, and because heat's going to be the premium. And again, we're presuming that most of our societal infrastructure is going to remain intact. Like I said, it's not going to be the day after tomorrow. Now, as far as never let a crisis go to waste.
Right.
That's the common feature of our government. And as you say, very often the crises are being manufactured because that's how politicians manipulate people. There'll be a sudden crisis, like a mass school shooting, and then the politicians will stand up and say, "Oh, gee, we have to ban guns now," and we have seen multiple examples of that. Basically, 9/11 was a crisis that was used to launch these wars across the Middle East, and so we see this degree of deception and hoax going on pretty much all the time.
And in this situation, how do you advise that people can help to discern between what's real and how can they protect and stand up for their rights and not lose their liberties every time something like that happens?
Well, standing up for your liberties is very important, especially right now because Israel's servants in government are trying to pass laws to literally criminalize criticism of the government of Israel. Now, of course, this is an attack on our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. And it's shocking how many of our politicians are working so hard to protect a foreign government, even at the expense of our First Amendment. And the ridiculousness of these laws is that it's perfectly legal to criticize the government of the United States, but illegal to criticize the government of Israel. So people need to make a big stink about that. Now, as far as trying to find your way through the maze of propaganda, and there is a lot of it coming out of corporate media these days, you need to not react to the story with shock. And I'll give you a good example. Back when the U.S. was still hopeful that they were going to get Assad out of power in Syria, there were a couple of incidents where there were these chemical weapons attacks on people, and the corporate media said, "Oh, Assad did it. He gassed women and children. Oh, the horrible monster. We have to go to war against him." And people got caught up in the shock and trauma of, "Oh my goodness, it's women and children," which is exactly what it was supposed to do. If Assad was really going to use his own chemical weapons, he would have used them on the rebels, not women and children. There was no point to that. And that's what you need to ask yourself. If you want to know if you're being lied to, look for things that should be there and are not. And in this particular case, what was missing from this story was a motive for Assad to use chemical weapons. He certainly knew that that was what the United States wanted him to do, but he was already winning the war. He didn't need to use the chemical weapons. The story made no sense.
I want to latch on to something you just said and turn to a different subject. You mentioned look for what's missing and should be there but isn't. Rather than just focusing on what's being placed in front of you, look for what's missing, and in that you have to use your common sense.
Yes.
We've been talking about outrageous medical costs and runaway medical insurance, medical costs, and that sort of thing recently with a couple of other of our guests. And that was one personal story that we gave some documentation and showed, and I can try to insert that again in this part of this interview, where my insurance company was willing to pay 10 times the negotiated price to one provider that they were willing to negotiate and pay to a different provider, and I got stuck paying my portion of that huge inflated cost too. And I look at that and I go, why would they say that this particular procedure with this particular medication is only worth $576 over here, but it's worth $1,600, or no, it was like over $5,000 across town. Same exact procedure, same exact medication, same brand, same everything. But when you look at that on the face value of any any rational way of running a business. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I've been told by a couple different parties how we as the consumer and as the patient, we don't see behind the curtain where the money is all really flowing and who's getting their cut and everything. Can you talk to us about, in the arena of medical costs, how you can basically look for what's missing, what doesn't make sense, and then how you can take care of yourself?
Okay, well, the decline of America's medical industrial complex, if you will, goes all the way back to Richard Nixon when he signed the Health Maintenance Organization Act. And this is what transformed medical care from being about medical care to being about a money-making operation. And prior to Nixon signing that act, there were actually laws that limited how much profit medical practitioners could make off their patients because they were trying to preserve medical care for the American people. Well, that went away, and it started being about the money, and it started being driven by the insurance companies and the insurance costs, and hospitals were trying to negotiate with these insurance providers, and everybody was fighting over what the costs of the procedures in medicine should be. And over time, the prices kept getting driven up and up. The people at the very top are making vast sums of money. It's corrupted them. Again, there doesn't seem to be much political will in Washington, D.C. To address the concern. So
what can the ordinary person do to try to take care of their families faced with this corrupt system?
Well, first of all, when you receive a bad diagnosis, the first thing to do is not panic and not get stampeded into a bunch of tests and treatments that you may not really need. Always get a second opinion. And it is okay to shop around in terms of, prescription medication and things like that. And now, as of the first of this year, hospitals are required to post the prices of their various procedures and practices. So it is now possible for some comparison shopping, and that's an important first step.
That certainly has been difficult. It certainly was a daunting task for me last year. I was unable to do that in the time frame that I had available before paying this egregious amount for the same procedure I'd paid much less for at a different place because I couldn't get the price out of the other place in time. But anything, Mike, else that we should have asked you tonight that has been on your radar as far as current research that you're doing or issues that you're looking into?
Well, obviously, Venezuela is of concern. I mean, we're heading into yet another war. We're going forehead to forehead with both Russia and China. And it's just another very obvious U.S.-backed coup d'etat to take control of somebody else's country and loot it and plunder it. And I'm very concerned that our corporate media is almost trying to distract us away from these important issues with all this nattering about the border wall and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There's a lot of junk news on the corporate media, and people need to really start digging out for themselves where we are with all these wars, because right now the U.S. has military forces in 39% of the world's countries. And I think it's time we start saying, yes, it's a world war.
Yeah, we went to the Ron Paul Peace and Prosperity Conference in Washington, D.C. That's the Ron Paul Institute Peace and Prosperity Conference. And he had, in addition to himself and Lou Rukeyser and a bunch of others, he was strongly pitching this idea that, and it's not new for him, but he's been very consistent on this over decades, and that is that the U.S. really has no business being entangled in all these foreign theaters and the costs that go with it, and the resentment that it builds and that sort of thing. So it's quite, anybody who wants to find out more ideas of how we can get out of places we don't need to be, Ron Paul Institute is a great place to get connected there. Mike, how can people find out more of your work?
Well, my website is called whatreallyhappened.com, all one word, lowercase. And I also do a talk radio show at the Republic Broadcasting Network from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Central U.S. time, Monday through Friday. And you can find that at republicbroadcasting.org or at my website.
So we've been speaking with Mike Rivero, and I should have mentioned this in the beginning, folks, but today is Tuesday, February 12th, 2019. Mike, as always, thanks for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
All right, well, thank you for having me, and I'm sorry about the technical glitches.
We made it through it. You had a backup plan. That's the cool thing about being prepared. They say the stock market crashed today.
Yeah, I heard that.
Sounds like people's retirement accounts and savings accounts are going to get bailed into the banks.
Yeah.
Looks like pension plans and Social Security are going to get suspended too.
I know.
Sure, I'm glad we decided to put our money into gold and silver instead.
Me too.
Get your first ounce of silver at spot price and free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp. Hey Reluctant Preppers, if you haven't heard, we've already started our monthly 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle thank you gift to one active Patreon subscriber each month, signed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, and you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.